In the busy town of Adam, Ghana, Alma's days began with the first light of dawn. She would step barefoot onto the soft, damp soil, breathing in the fresh scent of the earth. This land was more than just a piece of property to her. It was her father's gift, his final blessing before he passed away. He had always said, "Alma, as long as you have this land, you will never go hungry." Those words lived in her heart every single day. The plot stretched wide, rich with dark, fertile soil that could grow anything: maize, cassava, yams. Alma worked it with care, her hands rough from years of planting and harvesting, yet each crop felt like a miracle. Neighbors often admired how healthy her produce was, and Alma would smile, knowing it wasn't just skill, it was love. She treated the land like family. Life wasn't easy, but Alma was proud. The money she earned from selling her crops paid for her needs, and even helped neighbors when they were short. Every time she saw the green shoots push through the soil, she felt her father's spirit beside her. Sometimes in the evenings, she would sit under the big mango tree at the edge of the farm, watching the sun set over the fields. The land wasn't just her livelihood. It was her peace, her pride, and the one piece of her father she could still hold on to. She never imagined anyone could take that away. One rainy morning, Alma woke up feeling strange. Her body was heavy, her head pounded, and every step felt like her legs were made of stone. She thought it was just exhaustion from working too hard on the farm, but the fever rose quickly, and soon she could barely speak. A neighbor rushed her to the hospital in town. The doctor said it was serious and she needed to stay there. Days turned into weeks as Alma lay in the white, cold hospital bed, drifting in and out of sleep, fighting to get better. While Alma battled for her life, her older brother Kwame visited a few times. He would stand by her bed, looking at her with a strange mix of pity and impatience. She thought he was just worried about her health, but something else was brewing in his mind. Without telling her, Kwame met with a wealthy developer who had been eyeing Alma's land for months. They shook hands in a quiet office, signing papers that would change Alma's life forever. The price was good, very good, but instead of thinking of Alma, Kwame thought only of himself. The money went straight into his pocket. Back in the hospital, Alma had no idea what was happening. She dreamed of her farm, of planting again, of feeling the warm earth between her fingers. She kept telling herself she'd recover soon and return to her fields. By the time the doctors finally said she could go home, Alma was thinner, weaker, but hopeful. She imagined walking back to her land, smelling the fresh crops and hearing the birds sing in the mango tree. What she didn't know was that her land, her father's gift, her life's work, was already gone. And the person who had taken it wasn't a stranger. It was her own blood. Alma's heart raced as she walked the dusty road toward her farm. The sun was bright, and the smell of wet soil filled the air after the morning rain. She felt tired from the long walk, but the thought of seeing her land again gave her strength. She imagined rows of green plants swaying in the breeze, the mango tree standing tall, and the quiet peace she had missed so much. But when she turned the corner, her smile froze. The sound of roaring engines hit her ears first. Then she saw them, huge yellow bulldozers tearing through the earth. The neat rows of crops she had planted months ago were gone, replaced by piles of dirt. Men in hard hats shouted orders while trucks rumbled in and out. It felt like the ground under her feet had disappeared. Alma stumbled forward, waving her hands. "Stop! This is my land," she cried, her voice shaking. Some of the workers glanced at her, then quickly looked away. One of them muttered, "Talk to the boss. We're just doing our job." Confused and panicking, she turned to her neighbors. They stood at the edge of the road, watching quietly. Finally, an old woman stepped forward, her eyes full of sadness. "Alma, your brother Kwame, he sold the land while you were in the hospital." The words hit Alma like a slap. No, he wouldn't." But the woman nodded. "We saw him sign the papers. The buyer paid him. It's done." Alma felt her knees weaken. She remembered the days Kwame came to the hospital, standing by her bed. She had trusted him completely, never imagining he could do something like this. Her chest tightened as anger and heartbreak mixed inside her. She looked back at the bulldozers chewing through her father's soil and realized that the place she had poured her sweat and love into was no longer hers. It wasn't just the land that was stolen, it was her father's legacy, her pride, her security. And the thief wasn't a stranger. It was the brother she had once believed would protect her. Amma didn't even wait for the morning sun to fully rise. Her anger was burning too hot. She marched down the road toward Kwame's house, her slippers kicking up dust with every furious step. Her hands shook, not from weakness this time but from rage. She didn't bother knocking. She pushed the door open so hard it banged against the wall. Kwame was sitting at the table, eating breakfast like it was just another peaceful day. He looked up, startled, then frowned. "Amma, what's wrong with you? What's wrong with me?" Her voice trembled, but it was sharp enough to cut. "You sold my land. While I was lying in a hospital bed fighting for my life, you sold the only thing our father left me." Kwame sighed and set his spoon down, as if she were just being dramatic. "Amma, calm down. You were too sick to take care of it. I did what I had to do. You had to betray me. You had to steal from your own sister." She shot back, tears already stinging her eyes. Kwame leaned back in his chair, his face cold. "Look, that land was just sitting there. A developer offered good money. I used it for the family's good. You wouldn't have been able to manage it anymore. For the family's good." Amma's voice cracked. "You mean for your good? You pocketed the money, Kwame. Do you think I don't know? The neighbors saw everything." He stood up, towering over her. "Don't come into my house accusing me. You should be grateful I made sure it went to someone who could actually use it." Amma's chest rose and fell with deep, uneven breaths. She realized then that he wasn't sorry. Not even a little. He didn't see what he'd done as wrong, and that hurt more than losing the land itself. She turned toward the door, her voice low but full of steel. "One day, Kwame, you'll regret this." Then she walked out, not looking back, her mind already turning toward what she would do next. Because this betrayal would not be the last chapter of her story. It was a quiet afternoon when Amma heard the knock on her door. She opened it to find a young boy from the neighborhood, holding a shiny white envelope. "It's from your brother," he said before running off. Amma closed the door and sat down at her small wooden table. She turned the envelope in her hands. It was thick, expensive, with gold edges and her name written in bold, flowing letters. Slowly, she slid her finger under the flap and pulled out the card inside. Her eyes froze on the words, "Kwame and Abina, you are invited to celebrate our wedding." For a moment Amma just stared at it. The same brother who had stolen her land, sold her father's gift, and crushed her trust, now wanted her to smile at his big day. She could almost hear his smug voice saying, "Come, Amma, let's pretend nothing happened." Her blood boiled. At first, she thought of tearing the invitation to shreds. Then she imagined throwing it in the fire. But as she sat there, the anger in her chest began to twist into something sharper. A plan. She would go. She would walk into that wedding looking strong, not broken. But she wouldn't go to clap for him. No. She would go with the truth in her hands and the perfect moment in her mind. Amma placed the invitation back on the table, her fingers tapping against the smooth paper. She pictured Kwame in his fine suit, surrounded by guests, laughing and pretending to be an honorable man. She imagined the way his smile would falter when the truth came out. She folded the invitation neatly and set it aside. The wedding would be in a few weeks. That was enough time to prepare. Enough time to gather what she needed. The thought made her lips curl into the faintest smile. This time, Kwame wouldn't see her coming. And when the day arrived, she wouldn't just be a guest. She'd be the storm. Amma didn't waste a single day. The morning after she received the invitation, she wrapped a scarf around her head, put on her old sandals, and set out to find the man who had bought her land. She had heard whispers in the market about him, a wealthy developer who drove a silver SUV and wore gold rings on all his fingers. People said he was the kind who liked to talk if you listened long enough. When Amma arrived at his office, the receptionist gave her a suspicious look. "Do you have an appointment?" she asked. "No," Amma replied firmly, "but tell him it's about the land in Adam." A few minutes later, she was sitting across from the man himself. He leaned back in his leather chair, curious. "Ah, you must be Kwame's sister," he said, a small smile playing on his lips. Hearing Kwame's name made Amma's stomach twist, but she kept her voice calm. Yes, I just want to understand the sale. The man chuckled and opened a folder on his desk. It was simple. Your brother said the land belonged to him, that you had no claim because you were too sick to manage it. He even signed an affidavit saying you gave him permission. Amma's eyes widened. That's a lie, she said, her voice trembling. He shrugged. Not my business to question. But I do have the paperwork and the payment receipts. Even photographs from the day he signed. Amma's heart pounded. Proof. This was more than she had hoped for. She leaned forward, her voice low. Can I have copies? The man studied her for a moment, then smirked. For a small fee, why not? By the time Amma left, she had a thick envelope tucked under her arm. Inside were copies of the signed documents, photos of Kwame shaking hands with him, and bank statements showing the payment. Walking home, Amma felt a strange mix of sadness and satisfaction. Sadness because seeing Kwame's betrayal in black and white made it more real than ever. Satisfaction because now she held the truth, solid, undeniable truth. She glanced up at the sky, the late afternoon sun glowing red. In her mind, she could already hear the wedding music, see the decorated hall, and imagine the silence that would fall when her moment came. The storm was almost ready. The wedding day dawned bright and warm, the kind of day people called perfect for celebration. In the center of town, the grand hall was dressed in gold and white, flowers spilling from every corner. Expensive cars lined the street outside, their shiny bodies reflecting the sunlight. Inside, waiters in crisp uniforms weaved between round tables, carrying trays of drinks and sweet-smelling dishes. Kwame stood near the stage in a sharp cream suit, his smile wide, his laughter loud. Guests gathered around him, clapping him on the back, praising the couple, snapping photos. He soaked it all in, the attention, the admiration, the feeling of being untouchable. To him, this was his day, and nothing could ruin it. But outside, walking slowly toward the hall, Amma adjusted the simple yet elegant dress she had borrowed from a friend. It was deep blue, the color of calm seas, and it flowed gently with each step she took. Around her shoulders was a light shawl, and in her hand, a small leather folder, worn on the edges, but holding power far greater than its size. As she entered, the chatter of guests momentarily softened. Some recognized her and whispered to one another, surprise flickering in their eyes. Amma didn't rush. She moved with quiet grace, scanning the room until her eyes landed on Kwame. For a brief moment, she let herself remember the brother she used to trust, the boy who once shared mangoes with her under their father's tree. But that image faded quickly, replaced by the memory of bulldozers crushing her land. Kwame spotted her then, his smile faltering just slightly. He hadn't expected her to come, and certainly not like this. She simply offered him a polite nod before taking a seat near the front, placing the leather folder carefully on her lap. The music played, the bride arrived, vows were exchanged, and the hall filled with applause. But Amma's heart was steady, her mind fixed on the moment she had been waiting for. The truth sat quietly inside that folder, patient and sharp, ready to slice through all the lies that had been dressed up in gold and white. And Kwame, still basking in his perfect day, had no idea that his storm had just walked in. The toasts began with laughter and clinking glasses. Friends and family stood up one after another, sharing sweet memories and wishing the couple a happy future. Kwame leaned back in his chair, his arm draped around his bride, grinning proudly at every word. When it seemed the speeches were over, Amma rose slowly from her seat. The room went quieter. A few people turned to look at her, curious. "May I say something?" she asked, her voice polite but steady. The master of ceremonies hesitated, then handed her the microphone. Kwame's smile tightened. "Amma, maybe now is not." She didn't let him finish. "I won't take much time," she said, turning to face the guests. "I came here today, not just as the groom's sister, but as someone who has seen the truth behind this celebration." Her voice was calm, but it carried across the hall. "A few months ago, while I lay in a hospital bed fighting for my life, my brother sold my only piece of land, the land our father left me. He did not ask. He did not tell me. He took the money for himself and signed papers claiming I gave permission. That was a lie. A ripple of murmurs spread through the crowd. Kwame shifted uncomfortably, his hand tightening around his wine glass. Amma reached for the leather folder she had placed on the table. From it, she pulled out a stack of documents and photos. "These," she said, "are the signed sale papers, the bank statements, and photographs of the day he made the deal." She nodded toward the projection screen behind her. An assistant she had spoken to earlier switched on the display, and the images appeared for all to see. Kwame shaking hands with the developer, the large payment recorded in his account, the affidavit he had signed. Gasps filled the hall. Some guests covered their mouths. Others turned to stare at the groom in shock. Amma lowered the microphone slightly, her eyes never leaving Kwame. "Family should protect each other. But today, I want you all to see the kind of man standing before you in that suit." She handed the microphone back, her hand steady. The room was frozen, every eye now on Kwame, his perfect day cracking apart in front of him. The hall was silent for a heartbeat after Amma's words, the kind of silence that feels heavy in the air. Then came the gasps, sharp, shocked and loud. Whispers rippled through the guests like a sudden wave. People leaned toward each other, repeating what they had just heard, their eyes darting between Amma and Kwame. The bride's parents were the first to stand. Her father's face was red with anger, his jaw tight. "Is this true?" he demanded, glaring at Kwame. The bride's mother shook her head, clutching her daughter's arm. Kwame tried to speak, but the words tangled in his throat. It's not like that," he stammered, his usual confidence gone. His proud smile had vanished, replaced with a thin sheen of sweat on his forehead. The bride turned to him, her face pale. "You lied to your own sister. You stole from her." Her voice trembled, not with shyness, but with hurt and disbelief. Kwame reached for her hand, but she pulled it away. "If you can betray your own blood, how can I trust you with mine?" she asked, her voice breaking. From the back of the hall, a few guests began gathering their things. One by one, people started walking out, shaking their heads. A wealthy uncle who had been bragging about Kwame's success only an hour ago now avoided his eyes completely. Kwame turned to the crowd, his hands raised in a weak attempt to calm them. "Please, you're misunderstanding," but the large screen still glowed behind him, showing his smiling handshake with the land buyer, the bold bank transfer numbers impossible to deny. The bride's father took his daughter's hand and led her toward the exit. "We will talk about this later," he said firmly, not even glancing at Kwame. The bride didn't look back. Kwame stood frozen, his perfect wedding unraveling in front of him. The music had stopped, the laughter had disappeared. All that was left was the sound of footsteps leaving and the sting of whispers that would follow him long after this day. In the middle of it all, Amma sat quietly, watching. She didn't need to shout anymore. The truth was already louder than anything she could say. Amma rose from her seat while the room was still buzzing with shock. She didn't rush or look back. She simply picked up her leather folder, draped her shawl over her shoulders, and walked toward the door. The eyes of those still seated followed her, but she kept her head high, each step steady and unhurried. She had come to deliver the truth, and she had done exactly that. Outside, the evening air felt cool against her skin. The sound of the chaos inside grew faint behind her, replaced by the quiet hum of the street. She took a deep breath, feeling the weight she had carried for weeks finally lift from her chest. It wasn't joy she felt, but a calm, deep satisfaction. Word spread fast. By the next morning, the story of Kwame's betrayal was on everyone's lips. The bride's family had called off the celebrations, and lawyers were already asking questions about the land deal. The documents Amma had revealed weren't just proof, they were the start of a legal investigation that could undo everything Kwame had gained. Kwame's once bright image in the community began to crumble. The man who had walked around town with a proud smile now kept his head low, avoiding the same people who had once praised him. Amma didn't celebrate loudly. She didn't need to. She went back to her small home, her routine, her quiet life. But every so often, she would glance at the mango tree near the road and think of her father's words. Revenge, she realized, didn't always have to roar. Sometimes it could walk in quietly, speak calmly, and leave at the perfect moment, letting the truth do the rest. And that Amma knew was her victory.